Welcome to ground covers and other plants for shade. I had originally called this and other shady plants, but that kind of sounded a little sinister, so we kind of changed the name on it. We're going to kind of go through some plants. We'll look at some gardens and there's different rates of shade. I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that. So there's high shade, which is what you see in this picture where there's trees are kind of close together, but the branches are way up. And you can get some dampened sunlight, you can get some light in from the side. So there's different qualities of shade. If you have, say you've got a bunch of pine trees and you want to try to grow something underneath there, good luck. That's very heavy, dense shade and not a lot of light underneath there. There's a few things that'll grow, but my advice to you if you've got like heavy evergreens is to incorporate build upon the needles that are underneath there and don't grow anything, because those needles will pretty much keep weeds out, and that's what our goal is. So we're going to talk a little bit about some gardens. So there's some gardens. This is not my backyard. I have one tree. I have a very small backyard. It is not much bigger than this room actually, but I have a big sweet gum tree and I have some shade. So, but this is not my garden. This is what I love my backyard to be: shady, cool. Every backyard should be cool and shady. But there's lots of things you can look at. With shade gardens and plants, we're looking at texture. We're looking at lots of different colors of green, because in the shade, plants tend not to flower as prolifically. So you're looking at hostas. This is a Japanese forest grass. There's some more hostas. There's a lot of hostas. And then the shrubs. The shrubs are usually azaleas. They can be, in this neck of the woods, they're rhododendrons or azaleas. And there's some evergreen ones and there's some that drop their leaves. We can do some hydrangeas in the shade, but they just won't have as many flowers as they normally would have if there's a little bit more light. So this is a really nice garden. Here's another garden. This one comes down a hill. And they've incorporated a lot of moss. Moss is not a bad thing. It covers the ground, it keeps it from sliding down the hill, and you don't have to mow it. Yay. This would be really hard to mow down there, but they do have some really nice hardscapes. They have a little patio landing. They have a little creek with a little path across it. So there's all sorts of things you can look at here. And they do have some shrubs that tolerate the shade. They do have some perennials and evergreens in this one. Here's one that gets a little bit more light. You can see there's an open, what we would call savanna or prairie kind of out in the back part of that yard that gives it a little bit more light. But you can see that you can grow a lot more things if you have a little bit more light. There's a lot of hostas. This is yellow rocket, ligularia down here in the bottom. The other caveat with shade is that you got to worry about the tree roots. So you may not have a very good formal garden if you need things to line up perfectly, because sometimes where you want to put a plant, there's a big root. And people go, well, can I cut the root? You can, but you're going to damage the tree. So no, but you have to kind of move things around. So shade gardens are a little less formal. They're a little less rigid in their design for the most part. There's always exceptions. And there's really no gardening rules. There's no garden design rules. There's better design than others, but there's no rules. So yeah, we're gonna look at some ground covers, and there's lots of different ground covers. Even, we used to not plant a lot of impatiens because there's a disease that they get, but they're kind of breeding resistance into that. So we can get some all year color with annuals. But most of these are perennials, which is nice. We've got some really nice liriope grass that tolerates shade. Hostas seem to be the mainstay of our shade gardens, because there are so many different varieties and textures and colors and shapes and sizes. I have one that's called, I know I'd forget the name, but it's huge. The leaves on it are literally this big around, and they're lime green. Love it. There's one that's Blue Angel. It's got big leaves on it like this that are blue tinted green. They have variegation. They're solid colors. They have all sorts of textures in there. So we're going to kind of go through some plants. If you have any questions, just stop me and ask a question, because I get wrapped up in my brain and sometimes I forget to say all the stuff. So I do put the scientific name on here just because if you're searching on the internet, sometimes it's easier to find it by a scientific name. as opposed to, and I've tried to put the common name down here at the bottom. Sometimes if you put the common name in there and you're searching, you'll go, that's not what that looked like, because there's lots of different common names. So this is Bishop's goutweed, and this one's a really nice one that it's actually variegated, so it brings a little bit of light into it. This one's quite aggressive, and it's really easy to grow, but it can be a little bit aggressive. Now, when I say that, just think spreads very rapidly. So you kind of want to put this in a place where it's going to be contained, either surrounded by concrete or, in a container. It works really good in a container, but you want to kind of keep it. But it will work in the sun also. In the heat of the summer, it may get a little crispy around the edges. The cool thing about that one is you can just kind of cut it off and it'll grow back up. It won't hurt it at all if you just cut it back to the ground or weed eat it or whatever you need to do to make it, and then it'll put out another flush of growth that will be nice and clean and green for you. It does have a little bit of a flower. You can see that up here. It looks kind of like a Queen Anne's lace flower. It's a little white lacy flower. Not the prettiest of flowers, but it does flower. It's easy to remove if you need to remove it also. And it kind of grows by underground rhizomes. So you can get a very nice big patch of this in a garden, but it can be it can get away from you. Kind of like, has anybody grown creeping Charlie? And a piece falls on the ground and then all of a sudden you're like, it's everywhere. So yeah. Ajuga is one of the ones that we use a lot. It's also called bugleweed. It has a little blue purpley flower spike on it. The one on the far left is just the regular green one. But you know, humans can't just leave it alone. They find different sports. So this one is a little bit of a purpley leaf. There's one that has a little pinkish in it. And a little white, so there's different colors. Sometimes they grow it, because this one's a little bit slower growing, it doesn't spread quite as quickly, but it only gets 2 to 4 inches tall. So if you need something kind of short underneath your hostas or underneath your other perennials or even some shrubs, this one's a good one to have. And it kind of goes through the dry periods pretty well, I should say. Asarum, which is wild ginger. This is one of our native gingers that we have. This is not the ginger that we eat. That's a tropical ginger, totally different plant. But it has a really pretty heart-shaped leaf on it. This is just our native wild ginger. We do have some varieties. This one has a little bit of a darker patterning to the veins. And they do have little flowers. We do not grow ginger for the flowers because, as you can see here, they're underneath the leaves at the base of the leaf stems on the ground. You have to kind of get down and look underneath to find the flowers. They're pollinated by beetles and ants, so that's why they're close to the ground. But this one's panda bear. This one, usually they're brown. They look like mulch if you're not careful. But this one, panda bear, has a little bit of a white accent to it if you would like to grow that one. So this one spreads not very quickly. Gets maybe, very hardy. It gets about 6 inches tall. It'll go from deep shade to dappled shade. So it's got a pretty wide range of shade. It likes it from like a normal garden setting to kind of a wet area. So if you have kind of a downspout that gets a little bit more moisture, you might want to put some ginger in there. But it's pretty easy. It's very easy to grow. Very easy to grow. Let's see, is there anything else? What else are we doing here? It does really well here. It's very tolerant of our weird winters and our hot, dry summers. So I definitely would there's some lime green ones. So there's some that are a little bit more heart-shaped and there's a little bit more arrow-shaped leaf. But we're looking at textures and colors. There's a native Alabama ginger that has a little bit of a fancier flower, a little redder. So there's all sorts of gingers. Honey song. This one has a little bit of a silver variegation to it. And usually the variegated ones grow a little slower than the regular ones do, just because they don't produce as much chlorophyll. So here's Lily of the Valley, not a native plant, but does very well in full sun to full shade. It does not tend to like wet feet. but it does kind of do well in just our regular garden setting. Usually with our shade plants, because they're underneath trees, they get a little less water because it's, you know, what do you do when there's a afternoon thunder shower? You stand underneath the tree and wait till it's gone, and then you go out because you're dry. The trees are really good at sheltering and shedding that water to their edges so we can stay. So usually a lot of our shade plants will tolerate dry soils, and Lily of the Valley will. It's also a good scented plant. There's a variegated variety also, and there's one that has pink flowers. So you could kind of mix the two if you would like in there. These don't get very tall, maybe, 8 inches tall at the tallest with the flower spikes on there. 6 to 8 inches are not very tall. They do very well underneath some shrubs. And things that probably kind of come up a little later would be a good place to put these. Has anybody grown sweet woodruff? No? It has a really sweet kind of woodsy smell to it. And sometimes they used to, back in the olden days, they used to put that in their their bedding to kind of sweeten the smell of the hay in their beds.
They use it in a special line in Germany.
Oh, do they? Oh, okay. Had no idea. But yeah, it has a pretty interesting little leaf on it. It's called a world leaf, where all the little leaflets come out at one point. And then they have these little white flowers in the middle of summer. It only gets 6 to 12 inches tall. So again, we're talking really short little plants. And it spreads slowly from the outside of the edge of the clump. So it's a clump former. Prefers moist, rich soil, don't we all, in partial shade. With cool summers. We don't really have cool summers, so usually a little bit more shade will help keep that cool. But yeah, this is not a native plant to Kentucky, but it is a nice addition to any type of shade garden. Hostas. We talked about all the hostas earlier, but again, I think that people like them because there's so many varieties. There's hostas that are only 2 to 3 inches tall. They're miniatures. There's some that are 36 to 48 inches tall, so those are giants, and we have everything in between. We have lime, this is what they call the blue color hosta. We have the variegated, and then we have the reverse variegated with the white in the middle. This is a creamier. There's ones that have more white. So there is a hosta for every situation. And hostas will actually tolerate a little bit more sun, but they kind of started out in the 70s, kind of came in from Japan, and then they have exploded into all these different varieties. There's a hosta society. And I have there's a plant collector that goes, yep, I grow both kinds of hosta, the green and the variegated. But he really grew his practice, his nursery, by selling hostas. That's what he started out doing. He's got all the different kinds of hostas. And there's probably 1,500 to 2,000 different named varieties of hostas. So if you want to specialize in something, this would be a good plant because it'll take you a lifetime to collect them all. The ones that are fairly popular are usually a little cheaper. If you get some of the specialty ones, they can be $100, $200, $300 for a little tiny plant. I don't recommend growing those because Murphy's Law says the more you pay for a plant, the more likely it is to die. So that's how my gardening experience has gone. So I try not to pay too much for a plant, but I have. Liriope. Liriope is one of those plants that people go, oh, it's monkey grass. We grow it all the time. But it is a good plant. There are clumping forms. So you've seen those along people's sidewalks. And there's a running form that I'll show a little bit later. It's a different species, actually. But sometimes that also gets confused with monkey grass. But Liriope, there's the regular green, there's a big blue, and normally it has a purpley flower spike on it. Some of the variegated ones have a white flower spike, so they're usually in some type of combination. The big blue gets about 12 to 18 inches tall. It looks like grass, but you don't have to mow it. That's the cool thing. So you can have a grass look-alike in your garden without having to mow it. Now, if it's in the front yard, you might get a little citation that says, hey, you got to mow your grass. Well, grass doesn't really grow in the shade, but monkey grass does. And it's like, no, it's a perennial. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And then the creeping lily turf is one that kind of spreads a little bit faster. So you'll have the clumpers and then you'll have the spreaders. So you'll see, if you see a big patch of it, that's usually a spreading variety of monkey grass or liriope. Oh, because of its rapid spread, it's not a good edging plant, but it's a good ground cover. So they do give that dense grass-like appearance, and then they bloom in July and August, usually when not a lot of stuff is growing. I had Japanese spurge in here, but that's kind of gotten a bad rap, Pachysandra. But we have Allegheny spurge, which is our native spurge, and is not quite as aggressive as the Japanese, but gives you that really nice ground cover effect. It'll keep out the weeds. The little flower spike it gets in the springtime will host our native bees. So it's a native, it naturally grows in our forest. It does a really good job. It likes a wet to moist soil, so if you've got a little bit more moisture, Allegheny spurge will be good for you. It's evergreen. It's gonna look green all the time, which is sometimes what we want in the wintertime. It does really well about shedding those leaves off because it naturally grows in our forests. It tinges purple in the spring, turns a little bit more green, and it does have a good fall color. Well, I say fall color. It turns kind of a yellowy green in the fall and stays that way until the next spring. Easy to care. You kind of blow the leaves off in the wintertime. That's all you have to do to it. It'll spread. One of my favorite perennials for shade is lady's mantle. And you're like, why? Well, when it does rain and it gets wet, it collects all these little droplets on its leaf surface, which I think is pretty. It has a very nice yellowy chartreuse flower in the early summer. It's attracted to butterflies, bees like it. It doesn't tend to flop open as much as long as you don't over fertilize it. It gets about 1 to 1.5 feet tall, so it's kind of a little bigger than some of our ground covers. And it makes a really nice clump in the garden. It can get to about 2.5 feet wide in the garden. If it gets bigger than that, it's time to kind of chop it up and spread it out again. It's not aggressive. It takes medium moisture, medium soil for that. So it's a little bit of a different color. We don't have a lot of yellow colored flowers in the shade garden. Usually they're white or they're purple or blue. This is Japanese painted fern, and this is Ghost. Ghost is kind of silvery, and bringing lighter colored foliage or flowers will brighten up your shade garden. It'll bring light into the shade. Or sometimes if you have you ever heard of the night gardens where all the flowers are white and you can see them in the night? Kind of goes the same thing for the shade gardens. We want to kind of bring some light into that shade garden because sometimes it can be really dark. But these only get, 8 to 12 inches tall. I mean, my little ghost fern is only this big, but it's only been there for a couple of years, so it's a little teeny tiny. It loves the clay soil. It needs a little bit more moisture, so a normal to a moist soil will be fine for it. I tended to add water to mine, watered it a little bit better. This one comes up with like a purplish, dark red stalk to it, and then the fronds unfurl to this silvery gray color. About 24 inches tall. It is a lady's fern. Let's see. Oh, here's burgundy lace. So they have a silver one, and then they have one that's a little bit more purple in burgundy lace. There's our non-native ferns that we have. We have some native ones too that are great. This is another one of my favorites because of the story. So this is heart-leafed Virginia or pig squeak, and I'll tell you the story of the name. But it has these really pretty big, they look like giant lettuce leaves. And then they put on a big pink flower stalk. Well, I say big, it's about 12 inches tall. It can be pink. There's one called apple blossom that's kind of a lighter pink. And the reason that it's called pig squeak is if you take the leaves and you rub the front sides together, it squeals like a pig. Makes a pig squeak. This will also grow a little bit more into some more sun. It'll also bloom a little bit better in some sun, but part shade, it'll bloom a little better. Full shade, not as much. But we really grow this one for the leaves, and it looks pretty. It turns a burgundy red in the fall, so it has some good fall color. Very low maintenance. This one will just kind of creep along. It's not very aggressive. This is just the straight species flower. The apple blossom one is a little bit lighter pink with a dark pink edge on it, which is kind of fun. This one doesn't get very tall, about 12 inches. Brunaria, or heartleaf Brunaria. This one's called Jack Frost. I'm pretty sure this is Jack Frost. Oops. Yes. And this is a very nice, this is also called forget-me-not, but if you Google forget-me-not, you're gonna get a whole lot of other things. So Brunaria is what you kind of want to Google this one. But the plain one is just plain green and it's not very pretty, but they've found one that has this silver inside the veins, which is very pretty. It puts on a blue flower, kind of like a forget-me-not, and it gets a little bit taller than the foliage. There's one called Big Jack, which gets about 3.5 feet tall. That one is probably not very hardy here because it doesn't like the heat. We're kind of at the southern edge of its growing zone. So you might need to water that. If you get that one, you need to water that one a little more. But this one is Jack Frost, and this one does really well here. I've seen big clumps of it. It's a slow grower. It's not a native. Usually it's grown farther north than us. But it's easy to grow. I would say it's tolerant. It doesn't like really dry soil, so it's probably not doing really well in my yard. But if you can give it a little bit extra moisture, it'll be just fine. It's rhizotomous, so that it kind of creeps with underground rhizomes. So you can see that it makes a really nice clump of foliage. Carex, and you're like, what is that? That looks like Cousin It, or a very slow-moving green sloth. Carexes are our sedges, and there's lots of different sedges. And the reason that they're sedges and not grass is because sedges have edges. And usually a grass has a stem that's round. A sedge has a triangular shaped stem. So if you try to roll the stem in your fingers, you'll see that it's triangular shaped and not round. So it's a sedge. Striped mop top sedge, as this particular photo is. Definitely hardy here. It is not native to North America, it's native to Europe. But there are some native sedges that you can find that do well in sun, in shade, in dry, in wet. I will say the sedges are probably our next multi-area plant that we're gonna really you're gonna see a lot of explosion into sedges because they fit into a lot of different gardening niches and they look like turf. Maybe turf that you haven't mowed in a while, but that's just, I just like this one because it just looks like a little creepy crawly that's growing on your grass. But they can get anywhere from 6 to 8 inches to 12 to 14 inches, depending on the species. This one gets about 12 inches tall. So look out there, see what you can find. But a lot of them will tolerate some shade. And if you have moist shade, you got lots of sedges out there. This is another one that's close to my heart is Bleeding Heart. Sorry, Bleeding Heart's a really nice one. This one happens to be fringed Bleeding Heart. That just means that the leaves are a little bit more dissected. They're a little bit more ferny. There's also the regular Bleeding Heart that has more lobes on their leaves. This one, the only problem with Bleeding Heart is that it comes up and it blooms and then it dies back to the ground. So it's a spring ephemeral. So it comes up, and if you're not careful, if you're like me, you'll plant something over the top of it and you're like, where did my Bleeding Heart go? And then the next year you'll go, oh, there it is. It's in the middle of the hosta that I planted right over the top. So be careful, this one you're gonna have to mark where it is. Otherwise you're gonna plant something over the top in the fall or in the summer when it's not there. Very slow spreader, gets to about, 8 inches, 10 inches across, about 18 inches tall with the little flower spikes. It has a ferny-like foliage. It will bloom, sometimes it'll bloom intermittently through the summertime. The fringed one lasts a little longer than our regular Bleeding Heart does. Tolerates full sun if you keep it watered. This one prefers a little bit more shade. There's 2 different kinds of epimediums, and these come from mostly Japan and China, which is interesting because we're on the same latitude cross. So there's rhizomatus is the yellow one, and they're called fairy wings because that's kind of what the flowers look like. They look like little fairies, and they're held above the foliage. Some of them are evergreen. I found that the yellow ones are a little bit more aggressive than the pink ones, so they come in pink and yellow. And they're really easy to grow. You just kind of plop them in there and let them go. And they'll make a really nice clump of foliage, and these bloom early in the spring, kind of either right before the leaves come out or right after the leaves come out is when they'll bloom. They can get 8 to 12 inches tall. I've got clumps that are 24 to 36 inches across, 2 to 3 feet across. But it does take many years to get a clump that big. But these are starting to come into their own and becoming more affordable. And they're just a little spot of color in the garden out there. This is meadow sweet, Filipendula, and it's tall. It gets 3 to 4 feet tall, and it has these beautiful white flower clusters at the top. There is a pink variety of Meadowview. It kind of has that lacy look into the summer blooming garden. It's a very clump former, so you might need 2 or 3 plants, but it does get 2 to 3 feet tall with a 2-foot spread. So you can have a big, cover some distance with that. They get really tall. These would be for good in the back of the border, because they get kind of tall for that. This is Japanese forest grass, and there's a couple of different varieties of this one. This one's really nice, and it gives you that fountainy look without, naturally without having to do much to it. So it can edge a garden edge. It gets a little tall. It can get about 12 to 18 inches tall, but then it just kind of falls over gracefully in the garden. Or you can just put it out as a specimen plant, because they're mostly this lime green color, and it'll give you a pop of that color in the shade. And it kind of gives you the fact that if you use chartreuse in a shade garden, it looks like there's more sun, like sun's coming down and just hitting that plant, and it'll bring light to your garden. It does prefer some shade, so if it does get full sun, it can burn the tips of those leaves. But it's starting to come into its own. And there's some varieties that have a pink edge to them, and it's really quite attractive. Okay, so this is, I didn't do a lot of woody plants, but climbing hydrangea is one of those things that people go, what is that? That looks like a hydrangea. It is a hydrangea, but it's a vine. It's a climbing vine. So if you have a shady spot on a wall, and you can plant this there, these are very slow growing plants, but they look really pretty because the whole vine will be covered with the traditional hydrangea type blooms. It can get up to 21 feet tall. It's very slow growing, so it's not one of those things that you're gonna have to prune a lot. Partial shade to full sun. It does require some moisture, but it doesn't care about the pH of the soil. So it's a pretty wide ranging plant in that respect. This one's a little unknown. This is Mahonia, or creeping Mahonia. If you ever need a security plant and you don't want to plant barberry, but you've got some shade, the prickles on the edges of these leaves are very, very sharp. But they do bloom early. Ours bloomed in February, on a warm day in February, these yellow flowers would come out. The bees loved it. When it was kind of 50 or 60 degrees in January, February, these would open, the bees would be there, and they're like, yes. And then we'd have these fruit, and then the squirrels and the rabbits and stuff ate the fruit. I'm not gonna say that humans can eat the fruit. Check that out before you do that. I think one species they make jelly, but don't take my word for that. I am not a family consumer science agent. I can tell you how to grow the plants. I can't tell you how to cook them. I think these only get 6 to 8 inches tall. We had the other Mahonia, the Oregon Great Polly, and it got to about 3 feet. But this one's easy to prune too, if you wear some leather gloves, because again, those leaf points are very, very sharp, and they will go through just about anything. So this is our other grass mimic that we have in our lecture today. This is Mondo grass, or Ophiopodon. And this one actually comes in this deep, dark, they call it black colorway, and it puts out a light purple spike of flowers on it. You might see it in green. I think they also have a variegated one, but the blades on the Ophiopodons are the Mondo grass are very, very skinny, and these plants are pretty short. They can be up to 4 inches tall. So this would be a good ground cover for underneath trees. If you just wanted not to put any mulch, you can just put this underneath there. It does a pretty good job of making a good mat to keep the weeds out. And who doesn't want a black great bladed grass in their yard, which I think is fun, but they're pretty short plants, but they're very hardy. This is another perennial that we have, is Solomon seal. There's the regular Solomon seal, which is our native Solomon seal. And then we have a variegated variety. And those are pretty good clump formers. They will tend to spread fairly slowly in their clump stage. But the bees really do like these flowers as they start to come down, our native bees. They're big enough that they can shake the pollen out of there. So here's Solomon seal. This one gets about 1 to 3 feet tall. If it gets a little bit of moisture, it gets a little taller. If it's a little drier, it'll stay a little shorter for you. But yeah, you can find those everywhere. Plumeria is also called lungwort. And you're like, lungwort? Well, they named that because they thought that if they made a tea out of it in ancient times, that it worked on the lungs. I don't know if there's any scientifically based information on that, but that's why it's called lungwort. And sometimes the leaves look like little lungs, so they thought that because the leaves were shaped like lungs, they would work on the lungs if you brewed a tea or made a decoction or something of that sort. But we've got a couple of varieties. This is Dark Vader. Sometimes you just buy plants for their names. This one has a very dark flower. It's a dark purple flower. Usually our pulmonarias are pink. This is Cotton Cool. This was a variegated silver leaf shape to it. Again, your silver is going to bring your light back into your garden. This is one of our native canbys, Haximias, and it's an evergreen. It's hardy to zone 7, so we're good there. It grows very slowly, less than a foot a year. It has this little tiny flower, and it's a little teeny tiny short. So it kind of spreads. It's an evergreen, so it's going to be green all year until it drops its leaves and then restarts. So you're going to get this mat of foliage. It's not very pretty, but it's a perennial, woody perennial, and it's a few of the evergreens that we can grow in our high pH soils. So if you have high pH, you might want to try this one out. This is fragrant sumac, and this is kind of a little shrubby plant too. This is the summer foliage in the green. This is the flower. The flowers are yellow, and it has that fragrant sumac-y kind of smell. It is not poison sumac. It probably will not give you a rash unless you're very sensitive to that. The low grow variety, which I think this is, only gets about 3 feet tall. The regular fragrant sumac gets about 6 to 10 feet tall. So make sure you get the low grow if you're looking for something. Stephandria crispa, this is also a woody plant that's really good in the shade. It's called lace shrub, and it does, when the flowers come out, it does look like lace because it just covers the whole plant. And you can kind of see some of the flowers up in this area here, but it does a really good job in the shade, and it flowers profusely in the shade. You can see the Japanese painted fern down there in the bottom. Looks really well over rocks or a hillside because it has that natural weeping format to it. It just kind of weeps down. Very hardy here, does well with just average moisture, average soils. We don't plant this one enough. This one's a really good shade shrub that we don't do that. This is germander, and people are like, what's that? Well, it's an old-fashioned plant. Your grandmothers grew it, and there's several varieties. This is the regular pink germander. Does a pretty good job in the shade. There's also a blue variety that has silver foliage in the shade. It's native to Greece, but it does a pretty good job in our kind of hot, dry summers underneath the trees for us. And it gives us a little bit different color range for that. Has anybody grown foam flower? I love foam flower. Tiarella, they've done a lot of the plant companies have done a lot of breeding with Tiarella. And so we've got iron butterfly, we have pink sky, but all the Tiarellas have this very bold leaf structure. Whereas our corabelles have little tiny like round leaves, the Tiarellas have really bold. And sometimes they're marked with purple centers along the veins. Sometimes they're just a spot of purple on there. But these I would mix in with my hostas and my corabelles and things of that sort out there. But they've really gone to town. They've got pinks and white. Sometimes they just grow them for the foliage. We didn't even get into corabelles. They've done a lot of things with those too. Spiderworts, this one can get a little aggressive, especially if you're growing the little purple, the regular one, the one that everybody's grandmother had spiderwort in their garden. It's blooming right now. I have the white variety, which is just now starting to pop out. And they do have a chartreuse variety that has a little bit darker purpley blue flower on it. They really like a little bit more wet. They get to about 1.5 feet tall. They do a really good job. They love part shade. They like a little bit of moisture, humusy soils. They will tolerate some boggy conditions if you've got boggy conditions. And I think this one is called Hawaiian Punch because of the color. That's probably not what I would call it, but anyway. I don't think they can call them after a drink. Let's see. When they become overcrowded, we're going to divide those. And when they get out of hand, you divide them and you hand them to your neighbors and say, hey, here's a plant. Because you're not allowed to say no to a plant. Barren strawberry. This is not the wild strawberry that you get in your grass or in your flower beds. Barren strawberry has yellow flowers, and the ones that we find in my flower beds are white flowered. And they don't really have a fruit on them that you can eat. But this is kind of will bring a different color into your shade gardens. If you notice, we didn't have a lot of yellow flowers in the shade. This one doesn't get very tall, 6 inches at the most. It's a little short. It looks like strawberries. They're little short plants, spread by overground runners, just like our strawberries plant. This one is a native to Missouri, and it's a prairie plant. So it's one of those that we can grow here fairly easily. And it tolerates a wide range of sun to shade to moisture levels. This is yellow root. This is definitely a native to where we are. It's usually found along the stream sides, up on the bank where it's moist and cool. It spreads into these dense thickets, and they call it yellow root because when you break the roots open, they're yellow. And they actually make it. It's a common ingredient in some folk remedies. So it was historically it was used to treat everything from ringworm and dysentery to diabetes and high blood pressure. We do not recommend those practices now. Go to your doctor if you have some medical conditions. But yeah, it's definitely this is fall color, so it gives you a really nice pop of color in the fall. It really will work well over a hill or some rocks and things of that sort. And because this one is Xanthorrhiza, it's the Latin. This is our last plant of this talk.